you. But no, not a war. Korea wasn't a war. Iraq wasn't a war. Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Somalia, Yemen. None of those were wars. You know, it's anyone, if there was any political will, any one of these presidents could be arrested for any number of crimes. And yet they're not. But yet Trump didn't give back the classified information quickly enough, even after they asked him. Oh, he's got to be indicted for that. Even though other presidents have done pretty much the same thing, no, he's got to be indicted for that.
What is the Georgia thing is interesting because he was going to have a press conference where he was going to reveal all of the information that proves that he was telling the truth about the Georgia election being rigged.
Yeah,
and he didn't have the press conference.
Yes, well, this is a thing that I got to say is a kind of knock on Trump here that, you know, this is a thing his lawyers, Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani, who just turned himself into custody today. But they would always say this after 2020. We have proof that millions of votes were stolen from Donald Trump and we'll be releasing this soon. And then it just never kind of comes. So I don't know what he thinks he's going to tell us about that. The issue with the thing in Georgia, where I will grant there's like a little bit of a gray area there. And I think that, look, there is a gray area there. It's kind of like when they impeached Trump over Ukraine. There was like a little bit of a gray area of like what exactly he did. It's just that when you look at things of all the crimes that presidents commit, the idea that you go after a president for this, it's so petty compared to these greater crimes. But like he called the Secretary of State in Georgia and was kind of like, I need you to find me these votes. But he was like, look, there's been fraud. I know there's been fraud. You got to go look for it. And the guy's like, I don't see any evidence that there's fraud here. And he's like, find it. I know there's fraud. You know, he was putting pressure on the guy to go look. Right. But it's not as if he was telling the guy, I need you to commit fraud.
Right.
He wasn't telling him, I want you to flip votes or I want you to manipulate something. He's like, I want you to go find where the fraud is.
Right.
So you'd almost have to prove that he didn't really believe that.
Right.
In order to prove, you know, because if there was really fraud, he has every right to tell the guy to go find it.
Right.
So now they're arguing that he didn't. And in the indictment, they argue that he knew it and he was like he knew that there was no fraud, but was still trying to get the guy to go find it. And the case that they're using to argue that is that he had advisors around him who told him that the election was legit. The problem with that is that doesn't prove at all that Trump believed those guys just because they told him that.
Right.
If there's one thing I'm fairly confident in, I believe Donald Trump believes he won the election in 2020.
Yeah, my position has always been we all have to agree that election fraud is not 0%. It's not zero, and everyone agrees to that. Do you think there's any election fraud at all? Yeah, probably. At some level, there's probably some campaign workers that have a vested interest in one party or another. Like of recent election fraud cases from across the United States, the Heritage Foundation's election fraud database presents a sampling of recent proven instances of election fraud from across the country. Each and every one of these cases in this database represents an instance in which a public official, usually a prosecutor, thought it serious enough to act upon it, and each and every one ended in finding that the individual had engaged in wrongdoing in connection with an election, hoping to affect its outcome, or that the results of an election were sufficiently in question and had to be overturned. So look at this. So it says here there's 1,438 proven instances of voter fraud, 1,240 criminal convictions, 48 civil penalties, 108 diversion program, judicial finding, official finding. Okay, so it's showing that there's at least, it's not zero.
Right, and that, you could argue, in a country as big as ours, wouldn't even be that bad if that's all there was. But those are just the proven cases.
Right.
So then you're left to wonder
how many people got away with it.
Right, how many go unproven.
Yeah.
And we don't know exactly what that answer is. But my thing is more like, I think if you zoom out and you just say, okay, what was the year that was 2020? Well, okay, coming into 2020, Donald Trump is the president. He's presiding over what he would describe as a white hot economy. where there was very low unemployment. There were certain tangible things he could point to and say, "Look, this has really worked out for the economy." And
Can
we're
I
doing
pause
very
you
well.
right there?
Sure.
Is that because of the policies of the Obama administration about they were coming to fruition, or is it because of direct changes that he made?
So I would say a mix of both. But I would argue that it was kind of a bubble economy still. And that it was still propped up off very low interest rates and very high government spending, and that you can make things look good on charts when things are like that. But I would argue that he hadn't really fixed like the major underlying problems in the economy. But he did have some pretty significant deregulation in the energy sector. He did pass some very significant corporate tax cuts, and I think those things were very good for business. So kind of a mix of both. But that's the starting point of 2020. Donald Trump bragging, he brag about the lowest African-American unemployment and the lowest Latino unemployment and how great the economy was and how he's doing all these great things. He was poised to have an excellent shot at being reelected. And then you have the economy destroyed by government imposition. Like, even if you think the lockdowns were the right things to do, the fact is that state governors decided we're tanking our economy, like we're closing down our economy. And then you had a summer full of the biggest riots of my lifetime, which were sponsored not only financially, where you had big, powerful groups paying bail for rioters to get out of jail, but also just completely backed by the entire corporate press. This is the voice of the unheard, fiery but mostly peaceful, just making every excuse for these rioters going on in almost every major city across the country. During this whole time, anybody who wanted to speak out against this was often censored for doing so. If you wanted to speak out against the lockdowns or against Black Lives Matter or any of this stuff, you might lose social media, you might lose your job. A bigger censorship campaign than we've really ever had before. This is all going on that year. And then they announce that we are overhauling the way we do elections. And for the first time, we're letting everyone vote by mail. Not just the absentee ballots for like military personnel, but everyone can just vote by mail now. A way that we were never okay with doing it before because we would have been very concerned about fraud. But now we're all going to do that. So in this like revolutionary year, we're overhauling how we do everything. And then you have the thing with the Hunter Biden laptop story being censored. And then the result is that Joe Biden wins the election. Given all of those factors, there's just no conceivable way that an overwhelming majority of Trump voters weren't going to feel like this thing was stolen.
Right.
Hey, woman, since your man ain't got no heart, why don't you go to my apartment tonight and I'll show you a real man?
There you go.
What? Fuck you.